De-Dollarization and the Death of Empire, the Rise of a Multipolar World. Hi and welcome. This is the Watchman Report. This is our July 2025 recap. For those who tuned in last month, we went over a brief understanding of what's happening in the world, what this report is about, and just to give another brief explanation, this report is about the geopolitical agendas that are happening around the world that are anti-West, anti-dollar. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about today is about that topic. It can seem as if I am anti-West or I am anti-dollar. I'm not. I don't really have an opinion. I'm neutral on it, although I am American. I'm reporting on what I'm seeing happening in the world. This report is based off of some of the things that I've experienced in my faith walk, in my Christian walk, some of the spiritual things that I've experienced in my life, and this is what led me to develop this report. So I'd like to get started. I'm basically just going to read through this report, and in this report there's going to be a lot of information from a lot of credible sources to kind of back up what this report is about. I've gathered this information from a lot of different places. This is probably going to be about a 40-minute video. So stay tuned, listen in. If you can't stick around for the whole 40 minutes, come back and listen to it later. There's a lot of really important information in here that you're going to want to listen to that pertains to you and your family and how the world is moving away from the US dollar and US hegemony. So we're going to start with the first point. And within this first point, there's going to be about 6 or 7 different points, sub-points. So this is the end of dollar dominance. Unipolarity collapses. The dollar is eroding global role. The U.S. dollar still accounts for the majority of global reserves, but the share is steadily declining. According to the IMF, as of Q2 of 2025, the dollar now makes up just under 58% of global foreign exchange reserves, down from 71% in 1999. In contrast, Chinese yuan, Indian rupee, and BRICS Plus member currencies have increased in use in bilateral and regional trade agreements. Here are the key events confirming the shift. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, traditionally pegged to the United States dollar, have begun selling oil in yuan and rupees. Brazil and China agreed in 2024 to settle all trade in local currencies, bypassing the dollar entirely. India and Russia conducted nearly 50% of their energy trade in rupees and rubles in 2024 to 2025. These moves show that even allies and trade partners are abandoning the dollar as the singular medium of international trade. The BRICS expansion, a direct challenge. At the 17th BRICS Summit in Rio de Janeiro, July 6th and the 7th, we talked about this a little bit in the previous video, leaders and high-level representatives gathered to reinforce the bloc's growing influence in the emerging multipolar order. As of the Rio Summit, BRICS includes the following members: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Egypt joined January 1st, 2024, as well as Ethiopia and Iran January 1st, 2024, and the United Arab Emirates. Indonesia joined January 6, 2025, shortly after Trump had threatened the BRICS nations. These are the the BRICS partners. They're not considered full members yet, but they are partners of BRICS, and they take place in the new development bank loans and stuff like that. Belarus, Bolivia, Cuba, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, Nigeria, Thailand, Uganda, Uzbekistan, and Vietnam. So these are some other nations that are in attendance, and this is really important because Mexico is one of them. Mexico is a NAFTA member. So that is a really big deal. One of our closest allies in terms, geographically and economically. They were there. Not only were they there, but what we'll talk about later is that they had something to say and something to mention at this particular event at the summit. So in addition to the members and partners, the summit hosted several invited observers and guests, including Saudi Arabia. They were represented by a foreign minister. They haven't quite joined yet, but they've attended, I think, three summits so far, if I'm not mistaken. Mexico was an active observer, as in they were active in their speech. Oops, there we go. Argentina was there. They were invited in 2023, but they formally declined the membership. The fact that they were there, I think, is an important thing because they're witnessing what's happening at the summit. Argentina went through a presidential election, and the new president of Argentina declined the membership invite. But they're still attending. They're still paying attention because BRICS is becoming something that is should be noticeable. Kenya, Colombia, Turkey, Uruguay, Azerbaijan, Chile, and Palestine, which is interesting, attended in observer outreach capacity. So, international organizations that were there is the United Nations, the African Union, the World Trade Organization, the New Development Bank, which is associated with BRICS, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So the 2025 Rio Summit Declaration emphasized the bloc's shift toward economic sovereignty and cooperative development. Condemnation of unilateral trade measures and sanctions imposed by dominant Western powers, that was their declaration, as well as endorsement of trade in local currencies and strengthening of national payment systems, expansion of BRICS Pay, with growing interest in a blockchain-based settlement architecture to bypass SWIFT. While no BRICS currency or basket system was formally launched, the declaration reaffirmed ongoing technical studies toward this goal. And one thing to note, their declaration really had nothing to do with destroying the United States, really destroying the US dollar. I don't think that's really the goal of BRICS. I think the goal of BRICS is to come out from underneath the US dollar's stronghold on the world, because a lot of nations, they want to do things that are counter to what the West want. And whenever countries do things that are counter to what the West wants, there's sanctions. And not just sanctions, but with Russia recently, they seized their assets. You know, they completely pulled Russia out of the Western economic system completely. So, and Russia is thriving. So it's very interesting. Many BRICS nations have experienced direct economic harm from the U.S.-controlled financial system. Maybe I should just read it. Russia was removed from SWIFT in 2022, prompting China and India to build parallel payment systems. Iran and Venezuela have long been locked out of dollar clearing systems, forcing them to create alternative energy trade routes. Argentina suffered from IMF-imposed austerity and debt traps linked to dollar-denominated loans. The conclusion of these nations: dependency on the dollar is a national security risk. Even U.S.-based think tanks like the Council on Foreign Relations and the Atlantic Council admit the dollar's dominance is now seen as a strategic vulnerability. Sanctions, once a symbol of power, are now encouraging the creation of alternatives. From CFR's May 2025 analysis, unrestrained use of sanctions is hastening the decline of the dollar by incentivizing adversaries and allies alike to seek other options. The U.S. Treasury itself, in a closed-door Senate testimony, warned that BRICS plus de-dollarization may outpace our ability to respond if the current administration continues with blanket sanctions and tariffs. And we just saw recently, I think that they're going to release another wave of tariffs. I think they already have. I think some nations have been tariffed up to 50%. So that's not in this report because this is all based in July. But that's a huge development, and the tariffs are pushing nations away and accelerating this movement. So it's really important that Trump stops doing that. The U.S. budget deficit crossed $2 trillion in mid-2025. Interest payments on U.S. debt exceeded $1 trillion annually due to lack of foreign buyers. That's a big deal. China dumped $80 billion in U.S. treasuries in Q2 alone, and their numbers are steadily increasing. Like their graph kind of started off going kind of low, and for the past 5 years, it's been just dropping. It's been like a cliff drop. Several Gulf states reduced their U.S. dollar reserves by 12 to 20%, reallocating into gold and BRICS-friendly currencies. Global investor confidence is beginning to price in the end of U.S. fiscal reliability. Mexico's increasing involvement with BRICS Plus, despite its geographic and economic ties to the United States, signals a tipping point. Even If even U.S. neighbors are hedging against the dollar, the core of Bretton Woods dominance is disintegrating. Mexico's finance minister publicly stated in May 2025, "We are rebalancing our economic future. No country should rely entirely on one pole, as in a unipolar world." What we are seeing is not just a weakening of the dollar, but the fragmentation of the unipolar economic order it upheld. BRICS Plus represents a global no confidence vote in U.S. monetary imperialism. While BRICS strengthens from the outside, what may be more destabilizing to the Western system is what's happening from within. The empire isn't just losing allies, it's losing its own. One of Washington's most loyal trade partners, Mexico, has begun to shift its posture, not quietly, not subtly, but decisively. Mexico's participation in BRICS 2025. At the BRICS summit in Rio de Janeiro, Mexico did more than just observe. It actively participated in closed economic planning sessions and initiated bilateral dialogue with Brazil, India, and South Africa. The Mexican delegation was led by Foreign Secretary Juan Ramon de la Fuente, who stated publicly, "Mexico is exploring frameworks that allow for a just multipolar order. The future cannot belong to one country or one currency." Mexico's finance and economy ministries have since launched a series of joint ventures with BRICS members, including Brazilian infrastructure partnerships, Indian pharmaceutical and battery tech integration, United Arab Emirates backed logistics investments. The catalyst for this pivot is no mystery: economic coercion from Washington. In April 2025, the U.S. reimposed 25% tariffs on Mexican steel, auto parts, and agricultural exports. Trump labeled nations seeking BRICS integration as anti-American trade risks and vowed economic penalties for disloyalty. Mexico, highly dependent on U.S. trade, was hit hard, but unlike previous administrations that submitted to Washington's demands, Sheinbaum's cabinet launched a reciprocal tariff program in May 2025. 20% tariffs on U.S. pork, dairy, corn, and automotive imports. A formal request to the World Trade Organization arbitration for politically weaponized tariffs. Negotiations with China and Brazil to replace U.S. agricultural inputs with alternatives. President Sheinbaum, Mexico's first female and first Jewish president, has positioned herself as a global South reformer. Her speech at the BRICS summit emphasized equity in global finance, criticizing IMF austerity measures, military demilitarization, calling for a 1% global reallocation from arms to climate and health, sovereign economic policy, rejecting Western conditionality, as in you have to meet the conditions in order to receive IMF funding. She framed this not as anti-Americanism, but as a civilizational realignment toward justice and mutual respect. This diplomatic language echoes rhetoric used by Brazil, India, and South Africa, signaling a unification of messaging among BRICS Plus and Global South countries. Behind the public speeches is a deliberate economic diversification plan. In leaked cabinet briefings reported by El Financiero, Mexico is working to reduce its U.S.-denominated trade share from 85% to 60% by 2027. Strategic trade pacts are being fast-tracked with BRICS infrastructure banks and alternative settlement payments. They're ditching SWIFT and relying on CIPS or India's UPI. The Mexican Central Bank is exploring partial yuan and rupee reserves for 2026. This is not symbolic. It's preparation for a post-dollar trading world. Sheinbaum's pivot is not politically risky, it's popular. A 2025 national poll found 62% of Mexicans supporting joining BRICS. 74% agree the U.S. exercises excessive influence over Mexican policy. 58% blame U.S. tariffs for rising inflation and food insecurity. This grounds Sheinbaum's foreign realignment and domestic legitimacy. The U.S. reaction to this has been defensive and erratic. Trump tweeted that Sheinbaum is selling out Mexico to China. The U.S. Trade Representative accused Mexico of subversive alignment. The Pentagon even released a threat assessment report in July 25, citing BRICS expansion in the Western Hemisphere as a hemispheric security concern. This rhetoric mirrors Cold War-era panic, suggesting the U.S. recognizes the shift as a threat to its backyard dominance. Mexico is the first NAFTA country to break the mold, openly rejecting total alignment with the United States in favor of a sovereign multipolar identity. It is aligning itself economically, diplomatically, and ideologically with BRICS Plus, even as the U.S. attempts to punish that decision. The ripple effect will not stop at the Rio Grande. Other Latin American states, Colombia, Chile, and even Canada are watching closely. Mexico's divergence highlights the visible cracks in the old order. But what about the structure itself? While administrations change, wars continue, and foreign policy remains eerily consistent. This isn't a political failure, it's a structural feature. To understand why nothing changes, we need to see who really holds the pen. In 1961, President Eisenhower warned of the emerging threat of a military-industrial complex, a vast web of corporate, military, and intelligence interests that could, in his words, endanger our liberties or democratic processes. That warning is no longer theoretical. It has matured into a full-blown, entrenched parallel power structure that exists alongside elected leadership and often overrides it. According to 2025 data from Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Brookings Institution, OpenSecrets.org, we see this structure clearly. Over 70% of foreign policy think tanks receive funding from defense contractors, from Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop Grumman. $130 plus million have been funneled annually into lobbying Congress for arms sales, proxy wars, and forward deployments. Top officials in the Pentagon, CIA, and NSA rotate in and out of private industry, blurring the lines between statecraft and profits. The result is what the analysts call a state of forever war, where new presidents may change the messaging, but not the machinery. Trump's 2025 administration has escalated military involvement in the Middle East and Eastern Europe, increased defense spending by another $120 billion, far exceeding Biden-era budgets, pledged to rebuild American deterrence by bolstering military presence in Poland, the Philippines, and Israel. Despite his previous anti-intervention rhetoric, Trump's second term is revealing the presidents don't control the ship, only the wheel. Every structural force, from Congress to Langley, pushes toward war continuity. This echoes Professor Jeffrey Sachs' claim. We are not run by presidents, but by the CIA, the Pentagon, and the military-industrial complex. A 2024 Foreign Wars expose revealed that think tanks such as the Atlantic Council, CSIS, and AEI published nearly 90% pro-war policy briefs leading into the 2025 election. Over half of these think tanks receive direct funding from defense industry PACs or PACs, or foreign governments benefiting from U.S. military engagement. These independent voices manufacture consent for interventions while producing expert analysis that props up defense stock growth. Here are some examples. The CSIS received $6.2 million from Lockheed Martin. Atlantic Council received $5.1 million from Boeing and foreign governments. AEI received heavy donations from oil-linked firms supporting Middle East deployments. Trump's own attempt to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria in late 2024 met a wall of opposition. Pentagon officials warned of regional collapse. The CIA briefed the Senate Intelligence Committee behind closed doors. Media think tanks immediately flooded coverage with Iranian threat resurgence narratives. The outcome? No withdrawal. Instead, reinforcement of U.S. outposts in Deir ez-Zor and Hazaka. New contracts signed with Raytheon to maintain regional stability infrastructure. This proves the thesis. Even if a president attempts to redirect policy, he is often neutralized by deeper institutional characters. From Bush to Obama, Trump to Biden, and now Trump again, the U.S. trajectory remains eerily consistent. Global policing, NATO expansion, Middle East presence, Pacific encirclement of China. This consistency is not coincidence. It is the machinery of empire functioning regardless of the driver. The average American voter does not vote on CIA budget increases, arms sales to Israel, troop deployments in Niger, covert operations in Iran. Yet all of these happen year after year without electoral input. This is the very definition of a deep state. The events of 2025 confirm what insiders have long whispered and researchers now document openly. The U.S. is governed not by presidents, but by a militarized elite class. This system, rooted in war profits and perpetual threat inflation, has no off switch, whether Democrat or Republican. The policies remain the same because the true authors of those policies are unelected and unaccountable. In this context, Trump's 2025 presidency is not a disruption of empire, it is the proof. In early 2025, the Trump administration reignited tensions with Iran under the banner of non-proliferation and deterrence. The result was drone strikes on Quds Force and assets in Iraq and Syria, naval skirmishes in the Strait of Hormuz, a coordinated cyber attack on Iranian infrastructure. This is disputed but confirmed by Israeli intelligence leaks. Officially, the goal was to disrupt Iranian nuclear capabilities, but no IAEA evidence supported an active weapons program since 2023. IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi publicly stated in March 2025, Iran's uranium enrichment is concerning, but it has not crossed into weaponization. This mirrors the 2003 Iraq weapons of mass destruction narrative, a justification for action that collapses under inspection. What's unfolding in 2025 is not a new pattern, but a recycled one. In Iraq, 2003 to 2021, 1.2 million civilian deaths, $2.4 trillion spent, 0 weapons of mass destruction found, and country is still politically fractured. Libya, 2011 to present, one of the wealthiest per capita African nations, now a warlord battleground. U.S. NATO bombing destroyed civil infrastructure under false pretense of genocide prevention. Open-air slave markets emerged post-intervention. Syria, it's from 2011 to present. U.S.-supported rebel groups fragmented into jihadist factions. Proxy war with Russia and Iran still unresolved. U.S. troops remain in oil-rich northeastern Syria, with no legal authorization from Damascus or Congress. The evidence? Repetition of strategy and repetition of consequences. Both public sources and leaked whistleblower data confirms CIA black sites still operate in Jordan, Iraq, and Somalia. Mossad assassinations in Iran have not ceased. 2025 assassination of nuclear scientist Reza Qasemi in Tehran confirmed by independent intelligence groups. From the gray zone, Haaretz, and former CIA analyst Larry Johnson, the covert war against Iran has never stopped. It's just gone deeper underground. Cyber warfare, assassinations, and sabotage are now preferred tools over full invasions. The implications are chilling. A shadow war is being waged permanently with no congressional oversight and little media coverage. The Ukraine war continues into 2025 with no meaningful peace talks. The Trump administration authorized new missile systems in Ukraine, including extended range HIMARS, allowed U.S. private military contractors to engage in frontline logistics and cyber defense, pushed for NATO acceleration talks with Georgia and Moldova, crossing multiple red lines Russia has long held. While Washington frames this as deterrence, it's effectively escalation. Even Henry Kissinger, shortly before his death, warned, "We are not pursuing peace in Ukraine, we are managing conflict as if it were policy." This confirms Sachs' commentary. The U.S. does not seek resolution, but sustained instability under the guise of strategic balance. Despite promises of America first, Trump has increased troop levels in Syria. The U.S. now occupies all oil-producing areas of Deir el-Zor, Iraq, reinforcements at Al-Assad Air Base in response to alleged Iranian-backed militias. Jordan, U.S. drone operations hub expanded in early 2025. Saudi Arabia, new arms deals approved, including F-35s and THAAD systems. These deployments are not temporary. They are part of what Rand Corporation calls enduring present strategy, a euphemism for imperial garrisoning. And I will mention as well that the United States is planning to build the largest fuel hub in Davao City, right here in the Philippines, over the next 5 years. This is a very serious, development that I will be covering in the future, but that is something to be paying attention to as well. Financial profiteering, who gains? Every military buildup directly enriches the same firms behind lobbying. Lockheed Martin stock rose 19% in quarter 2 2025 following new missile contracts for Ukraine. Raytheon Technologies received $14.7 billion in contracts tied to Iran and the Middle East operations. General Dynamics and Northrop Grumman gained from drone and AI battlefield system expansion. This is not defense, it's business. Despite the rhetoric of peace, anti-interventionism, or nationalist restraint, the United States remains the most globally militarized actor in human history. Whether in Iran, Ukraine, Syria, or Africa, the pattern is consistent. Manufacture a threat, launch preemptive strike, entrench military assets, profit through contracts, repeat. This is the very definition of a war economy, a nation whose existence is increasingly justified not by what it builds, but by what it destroys. And then there's Gaza, the bleeding edge of Western-backed warfare. No pretense of peacekeeping, no talk of stability, just siege, starvation, and silence. What we're witnessing here is not war in the traditional sense. It is the extermination by deprivation, sanctioned by silence, and funded by allies. The humanitarian collapse in Gaza, 2025. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza has deteriorated to its lowest point in recorded history, with over 35,000 civilian deaths reported since October 2023, more than 80% of the population displaced, complete collapse of water, food, power, and medical infrastructure. In March 2025, UNICEF reported that Gaza is experiencing a child mortality rate comparable to Somalia during the 2011 famine. Further confirmation from Doctors Without Borders, Oxfam, and UNWRA states that entire districts have no access to potable water, hospitals are operating without anesthesia or antibiotics, malnutrition has become the leading cause of death among children under 5 years old. Multiple watchdogs, including Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and the UN Commission of Inquiry, have documented what they define as deliberate obstruction of humanitarian aid, targeted attacks on food warehouses and medical convoys, and destruction of civilian water infrastructure. From the UN Special Reporter on the right to food in May 2025, this is not collateral damage, this is strategic deprivation. The blockade and bombing campaigns constitute a modern form of siege warfare designed to break the will of a civilian population. In legal terms, this meets the threshold of a war crime under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, Article 8, Paragraph 2. In January 2024, the International Court of Justice issued provisional measures against Israel, ordering immediate restoration of humanitarian corridors and suspension of military operations targeting civilian infrastructure. Israel ignored these orders. In April 2025, the ICJ escalated its response, issuing a non-binding ruling declaring the blockade and starvation tactics as violations of international law. The ICC has also formally opened an investigation into Israeli war conduct, despite threats from the United States and Israel to sanction ICC judges. Despite the atrocities, the United States, look at that. The United States is going to sanction ICC judges because the United States approves of children under 3 years old dying of starvation. Despite the atrocities, the United States continues to provide full political, military, and logistical support. $14 billion in new military aid authorized in 2025 alone, use of U.S. Air Force C-17s to replenish Israeli air-to-ground munitions, vetoes and the UN Security Council of ceasefire resolution supported by 137 other countries. U.S. lawmakers who criticize the war, such as members of the Progressive Caucus, have been publicly threatened with AIPAC-funded primary challengers, demonstrating the deep political entrenchment of Israeli defense policy in U.S. domestic politics. Who's really running the show right now? With AIPAC and a foreign government having such a massive influence on our government. From field reports compiled by UNWRA, Save the Children, and the World Food Program, over 66 children have died of malnutrition since January 2025. 97% of water sources are deemed non-potable. The average daily caloric intake in Gaza has fallen below 1,000 calories per person. 1.4 million people are reliant on sporadic airdrops, many of which fall into inaccessible or unsafe zones. This is not humanitarian failure. It is humanitarian sabotage. International volunteers and journalists embedded in Rafah and Khan Yunis have recorded Israeli drones targeting aid convoys in February and April 2025. Incidents confirmed by Al Jazeera, CNN, and Bellingcat. Use of white phosphorus in civilian zones, banned under international conventions. Intentional demolition of UN facilities and school shelters. Here's a testimony from aid worker Layla Hassan. The children I saw weren't dying from bombs, they were dying from hunger and diarrhea, and the bombs were blocking the food that could have saved them. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, this is what global leadership is saying. Gaza is on the brink of annihilation, not through war, but through engineered starvation. South African President Ramaphosa, apartheid was brutal, but we did not face extermination by starvation. Gaza is enduring what no civilized society should allow. Global South consensus. BRICS Plus countries have unanimously condemned the Gaza siege as a crime against humanity. Over 60 nations have withdrawn ambassadors from Israel in protest. BRICS is exploring the creation of an alternative international criminal tribunal if the ICC is blocked by U.S. sanctions. What is occurring in Gaza is not the tragic byproduct of war, it is the weaponization of hunger. It is the use of siege tactics to collapse a population from the inside out, carried out with full impunity and backed by the West. The failure of international institutions to stop it only confirms the reality. The post-World War II rules-based order no longer exists. It has been replaced by a system in which might overrides law, and starvation replaces diplomacy. In the ashes of empire, the world is not merely mourning, it is moving on. While the West uses food as a weapon, a new vision is emerging, one that trades wheat instead of bombs and roads instead of regime change. BRICS Plus is not perfect, but it offers something the Western order has long abandoned: dignity through sovereignty. BRICS is no longer a slogan, it's a system. As of mid-2025, BRICS Plus now accounts for 36% of global GDP, 47% of global energy production, and 50% of the world's population. $14 trillion in currency reserves, including gold, yuan, and rupee reserves. This is no longer an ideological club, it's an economic super network. At the 2025 BRICS Summit in Rio, leaders emphasized 5 distinct pillars: sovereignty and non-intervention. Nations have the right to pursue development paths without Western conditionality. Multipolarity, a rejection of unipolar control over trade, security, and finance. De-Dollarization, shifts towards local currency trade, a BRICS settlement system, and a cross-border digital currency platform. Resource sovereignty, protecting energy, food, and minerals from corporate monopolization and Western extraction. Peace through development. Infrastructure over invasion, roads and railways over bombs and bases. These themes are consistent across speeches by Xi Jinping, Lula da Silva, Putin, Ramaphosa, and now Sheinbaum. The financial infrastructure that BRICS has already built, the new development bank issued over $35 billion in non-US dollar loans since 2023, cross-border payment rails integrating Indian UPI, China's CIPS, and Russian SPFS, bypassing SWIFT. Energy coordination. Saudi Arabia and Iran have joined BRICS oil pricing talks, challenging Brent WTI benchmarks. Russia and China now conduct over 80% of energy trade in rubles and yuan. Brazil, Russia, and India have signed grain-sharing pacts to stabilize prices and reduce IMF dependency. BRICS academic networks and technology exchanges countering Western university monopolies. These are not theoretical proposals, they are functioning institutions. BRICS is increasing a space for the Global South to speak with one voice. A BRICS human rights charter is being drafted, emphasizing development, not liberal ideology. Joint cultural, academic, and media collaborations, BRICS Newswire, promote information sovereignty. Pan-African and Pan-Asian representation is expanding, helping nations escape the colonial linguistics and legal frameworks that still dominate the UN and IMF systems. BRICS is not trying to become the new West, it's rejecting the Western model altogether. Many nations see BRICS Plus as a lifeline to escape the traps of US-led globalization. Argentina was locked into IMF cycles of austerity, now pivoting towards BRICS Plus credit lines. South Africa wants protection from U.S. trade manipulation over its Russia ties. Indonesia wants technology transfer without IP restrictions or forced military pacts. Iran seeks a global platform where it is not automatically criminalized. In the words of Lula da Silva, we do not want hegemony, we want dignity. It's important to note what BRICS Plus does not do. It does not invade countries to install leaders. It does not impose sanctions outside of clear regional security concerns. It does not require ideology. Its members include democracies, monarchies, and socialist republics. Its glue is not uniformity. It is mutual respect, sovereignty, and real politic development. The Western establishment has responded with accusations that BRICS is a tool of authoritarian states, financial press warnings of chaos if the dollar declines, U.S. threats of secondary sanctions on BRICS financial networks. But none of these tactics are slowing adoption. In fact, they are accelerating it. Nations are tired of being told they must suffer to be free. BRICS Plus is not merely an economic bloc; it is a counter civilization. It is what happens when half the planet decides it no longer accepts the spiritual and material dominance of the West. The old system of dominance through debt, coercion, and regime change is being replaced by something imperfect but real: sovereignty, trade, and infrastructure over ideology, sanctions, and bombs. That is the new axis around which the Earth is tilting. The appeal of BRICS Plus makes sense when you understand what it's replacing. The West tells the world that the system is broken. But for those paying attention, it's not broken at all. It's working exactly as intended. The suffering we see isn't a failure of the model, it's the model made visible. Institutions like the IMF, World Bank, SWIFT, and even the UN were not built as neutral tools of global cooperation. They were built as enforcement mechanisms for post-World War II US and European power. As noted by scholars from Columbia, SOAS London, and Stanford, the post-1945 order was designed to secure cheap labor and raw materials, maintain capital flow into Western banks, enforce political obedience via economic punishment. The Bretton Woods system, led by the US dollar, was created not to help nations grow, but to ensure they remained dependent. As of 2025, over 90 developing countries are currently under IMF structural adjustment programs. These programs force austerity, privatize national industries, and undermine food and fuel subsidies to make countries investment friendly. The result? Unrest, devaluation, and economic captivity. Argentina has over 60% inflation and mass protests due to IMF-induced cuts to energy and food support. Kenya has riots erupted in March 2025 after a $2.1 billion IMF loan required to fuel subsidy removals, triggering a 39% rise in transport costs. Pakistan is facing rolling blackouts and water crisis due to IMF-mandated deregulation of public utilities. These are not accidental side effects. These are the intended effects to strip nations of sovereignty and sell their assets to Western investors. The US dollar system was never neutral. The SWIFT network allows US to unilaterally cut off nations from the global economy. The Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control can freeze assets, ban exports, and shut down trade routes without a UN vote. Over 30 nations are currently under some form of U.S. financial restriction, many of them for geopolitical reasons and not humanitarian reasons. Even allies like France, Turkey, and Germany have faced secondary sanctions or threats for trading with Iran or Russia. This isn't financial freedom, it's fiscal warfare. Western hedge funds and multinational corporations have grown wealthier by buying distressed assets in IMF-strangled nations, speculating on food futures, driving prices up for the poor, lending at high interest to nations desperate for liquidity. According to a 2024 Oxfam report, the 5 richest financial firms made $27 billion in profit during the food and fuel inflation spikes of 2023-2024. This is not capitalism. This is legalized extraction from the broken bones of entire populations. When a country resists this architecture, whether through nationalization, currency independence, or sovereign development, the military arm of the West enforces compliance. In Libya, Gaddafi proposed a gold-backed dinar. NATO bombed his country into collapse. Iraq, Saddam switched to euros for oil. Within months, Baghdad was rubble. Venezuela, U.S. sanctions, cyber sabotage, and coup attempts followed Maduro's China oil contracts. Iran and Russia in the 2020s, isolation, cyber war, regime destabilization operations. This is not a broken system. This is how the system works. The COVID pandemic, the Russia-Ukraine war, and the Gaza famine have torn the mask off of the global order. Even mainstream economists now admit global inequality is at an all-time high, dollar dominance is a geopolitical vulnerability, IMF austerity is a destabilizing nations, U.S. military aid correlates with more obedience than democracy. From the 2025 Davos conference, IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva said, "The world is fracturing into parallel systems. The West must adapt or lose influence." Translation, we're losing control. The global order is not failing. It is doing precisely what it was built to do: exploit, extract, control. The suffering of Gaza, the collapse of the peso, the riots in Nairobi, the default of Sri Lanka, these are not glitches in the system. They are the system functioning. That is why BRICS Plus doesn't just oppose specific policies, it rejects the architecture itself. The age of blind trust in global institutions is over. People now see the system is not broken, the system is rigged. That's my report for the July 2025. I've got another report coming out in a week. That report won't be so long. This one is probably about 20-30 minutes. I do appreciate those who stop by and listen. Please comment, please share, like the video, and if you enjoyed this content, if you have something to say, whether it's good, whether it's bad, this video and this report can seem very anti-West. It can seem very pro, maybe East or Axis or whatever. I'm not either of those things. I really see that there's a lot of things going on in the world that are changing the world as we know it, and the way that the world is functioning, and how we're going to move past this as a people, and especially as Americans. If the world is moving away from the U.S. dollar and they're keeping reserves and currencies other than the U.S. dollar, and they're holding on to gold as a reserve, and they're not trading in dollar, our value is going to collapse, our debt is going to skyrocket, and we're going to, everything's going to collapse economically. So I don't think the United States is going to implode and, be destroyed, no longer exist. But what I do believe is that we're facing a very different world where the United States will not be in charge like they think they're going to be in charge. I was really excited for, this new administration to come in and pull everybody out of the wars and stop. On day one, promised that the war was going to be over and all these different things. But here we are, like, we're still in war. We're threatening, this is recently, we moved our nuclear subs closer to Russia. We're encircling China. And this new report I'm going to be coming out with this fuel hub in Davao City. It's like the largest military fuel hub from the United States is going to be built here in the Philippines. And it's just, these are the things that weren't promised. I was excited for a lot of cool stuff, like exposing some things. And I'm not really pro-Trump or anti-Trump. I just was looking at the good things that he was talking about and hoping for the best. But they're all a part of this system, as this report kind of points out. It's a military-industrial complex. It's been the same since Bush. Nothing's changed. So, anyway, thanks guys for watching. That was just my little wrap up at the end. Like I said, please like, comment, and share if you enjoyed this content. Thank you so much.